Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Alex Layton. I am Jeff's only brother, and I've been asked by Joe and by Jeff's three sons to act as the coordinator, or perhaps the ringmaster, I'm told, of today's events. I hope I'll be able to do it without cracking up. I've already shown some signs of cracking up, but if I do, please bear with me, I'll get through it. Now, today is Shrove Tuesday, Fashing, Carnival, Mardi Gras. It's a day of celebration. And for us, it's a day to celebrate the remarkable life of Jeff. But it's also an occasion for sadness at his sudden departure and for reflection on what he has meant for all of us, each in our own different ways. We're going to take as long as we need, so that as many people as possible get a chance to share their reflections about Jeff, although if we're still going strong, as we head up towards 4:30, we might draw matters to a close at that point. Now, before we begin, I just want to say a couple of practical things. Firstly, I want to say that at the end of today's proceedings, once Jeff's casket has been taken out of the building, we encourage you all to stay and to have something to eat and drink, and to join with us and each other in sharing our recollections of Jeff. At that point, could you perhaps please pick up the benches and chairs and move them out to the edges of the building? The 3- and 4-seater benches will stack into stacks of a dozen or so, or half a dozen or so, and that'll give us space to mill around, and there'll be food and drink available at that point. I also want to take a moment to say thank you to all the amazing people who have helped us to bring this event together. Your sensitivity and generosity has been enormously appreciated by Joe, by Simon, Adam, Nick, and me. Today's event is being live streamed and also recorded. That means that we're using Wi-Fi, and I'm told that if people use their mobile phones, it can interfere with the Wi-Fi. So please, if you can resist the temptation, don't do recordings on your phones, because it'll interrupt the Wi-Fi. But there will be a recording widely available afterwards, which will be posted, and you'll all get the internet address for that. Right, now I'm going to start by giving an account of Jeff's life. It has something, if I start with a bit of family history, because it's got a bit of a bearing on who Jeff was and who he became. Our parents were two very different people thrown together in the turbulent years after the Second World War. Our father, Paul, was the middle of 5 children of a socially conscious doctor who practiced general medicine in the industrial West Midlands of England at the beginning of the 20th century. And he published books about the social conditions that he encountered. Paul's mother was the daughter of a Devon clergyman. She was rather more settled into conventional and conservative views than my grandfather, I think, must have been. But that's not altogether true, because she was an active suffragette in the suffragette movement. Paul became a barrister in 1929. He practiced law in the courts of Middle England for 10 years before joining the RAF at the start of World War II. The 6 war years saw him travel widely around the world as part of the legal arm of the forces, experiences that were well beyond those of his brothers and sisters. After the war, he became a rather solitary bachelor until in 1949, at the age of 45, he was on holiday in Italy with one of his friends when he encountered a very dynamic, red-headed Canadian woman, 10 years his junior. Our mother, Frances, was the 4th of 6 children of a strongly Protestant family in Canada. Her father was one of an Ontario farmer's 13 children. He had gone out west to make his life and became a land surveyor, prospecting the Canadian National Railway through the eastern side of the Rocky Mountains in Alberta. And there are family tales of the adventures that involved. He took some months out in the 1890s to join a fruitless journey to the Klondike Gold Rush, portaging up through the lakes and tundra of northern Canada with a group of others. Our mother was born in Edmonton in Alberta, but the family moved to Winnipeg around 1919 when our grandfather got promotion within the railway company. But tragedy was to strike the family. When my mother was 9, her mother died, leaving our grandfather with 6 growing children. He hired a staunchly Protestant Ulster woman as a carer and housekeeper, and in due course, to avoid the inevitable whispers that involved, married her. But then, when my mother was about 16, within the space of a year, both her brother, her only brother, who was the eldest of the 6 children, and her father died, leaving the 5 girls with their stepmother. This was the era of the Great Depression, and life was hard, but the girls strived to get an education, with my mother eventually going to study on a scholarship at the University of Toronto, where she became the first woman president of the Debating Union. During and after the war, she worked for the Canadian federal government as a social statistician and was sent by them to England in 1949 to research the lessons of food rationing during the war. And that's when she took time for a European holiday and bumped into my father in Italy. They were married in Canada in 1950 and went to live in Sutton Coldfield, a dormitory town, which I know some of you here may have been to, north of Birmingham. Our house was a Tudor-era cottage which backed onto Sutton Park, which is around 900 hectares of wilderness with woods, grassland and lakes. I arrived in 1952 and Jeff 20 months later in October 1953. We lived in what passed for middle-class comfort in the 1950s Britain, although my father's legal practice was certainly not enough to make us particularly affluent, especially as he was determined to afford private education for us. Our mother felt frustrated by the restricted lifestyle that went with our station in life and the place where we were living, not helped by the fact that my father's elderly mother lived just down the road, ready to disapprove of her daughter-in-law's nascent feminist attitudes. My father was a gentleman, quite passive. He's wise. There's a lot of Jeff. There's a lot of my father in Jeff. He was no great intellectual, and I think he represented stability and safety for our mother after her turbulent youth. It was she, our mother, who threw her determined personality into raising her 2 sons and pushed us to achieve. In many ways, she wanted us to have the careers that she felt she had forsaken in coming to England and marrying our father. In Jeff's case, this was complicated by the dyslexia that he was found to have. Dyslexia was not widely acknowledged or understood in those days, and our mother had to battle with the school in Birmingham where we had been sent to get proper help for Jeff. She arranged for him to see a psychologist who practiced nearby, an emigre, I think, from Switzerland, by the name of Dr. Alice Haas. Dr. Haas had been analysed by Jung and was a remarkable woman. Jeff later told Adam told me the other day, that Alice Haas was the person who probably most influenced his choice of career. She told my mother of Jeff that he would be slow to mature because there was so much there to mature. And some unkind folk might wonder if he ever fully matured. We didn't have local friends at home really, as our school was some distance away and our parents' friends were older and their children had all grown up. So Jeff and I mainly had each other's company when we were not at school. We spent our free time playing in the park, which opened up the world of nature, especially to Jeff, making dens in the woods and studying the flora and fauna in the fields and lakes. Adam asked me the other day whether we fought as kids. And while we obviously did, after all, we were brothers, I don't recall that being a real feature of our childhood. Certainly Jeff was good at winding me up. In 1965, when I was 13 and Jeff was 11, we moved to London as my father, by then already 60, was appointed a judge, trying middle-of-the-range criminal cases. Our mother, always the outsider, and she never lost her Canadian accent, took what she regarded as our father's exalted status very seriously. She caused us to move to a lovely and rather grand house in Wimbledon, which some of you here I know have been to, and assumed the persona of a rather pompous dignitary's wife. She did try to engage in a more fulfilling intellectual life and was an avid follower of political news, especially international affairs. Her devotion to reading The Economist, for example, was something that Jeff inherited and pursued for the rest of his life. Joe took the latest edition from the letterbox in Thornycroft Road the other day, just yesterday. My mother made everyone call our father Judge. This was a source of embarrassment to Jeff and me, but our father meekly went along with it. It's a shame, really, that our mother felt so much pressure to conform as she saw it. It prevented her, really, from embracing the vibrant life of London as much as she could have, and it was difficult for us. Geoffrey, in particular, was alienated by it. When we moved to London, it was just when I reached the age to be sent away to boarding school in Marlborough, one of the established English public schools, albeit rather more liberal than some of its counterparts at the time. Many of the boys there were the sons of Church of England clergy who had a special status in the school. Jeff, for his part, became a termly boarder at the prep school in Birmingham, where we had been until then. It was there that he formed a close friendship with Fabian Bush, and Fabian may possibly be watching this, I don't know, a boy who had his own abandonment when his father had emigrated to the United States. Fabian told me the other day that Jeff was his oldest soulmate. Fabian came from a Quaker family, and on Sundays was allowed to go to the Friends Meeting House in Birmingham instead of going to church with the other boys. And Jeff decided to join him, and this formed the starting point of Jeff's lifelong association with Quakerism. When he was almost 13, Jeff joined me at Marlborough, where he had raced through the curriculum, achieving good results, mainly in scientific subjects. He also came under the influence of one of the school's chaplains, a man called Peter Hardman, who came from a working-class background in Liverpool. Peter was keen to show some of the boys how the other half lived, and Jeff was among a party that went with Peter Hardman to visit and stay with working-class families who'd been displaced in the slum clearances of the 1960s in Liverpool and moved into soulless tower blocks outside the city. I remember Jeff being particularly struck by this experience. Encouraged by our parents and by good exam results, Geoffrey decided to read medicine and was able to get a place at the University of Birmingham. Before starting at Birmingham, he went on a course for gap year people in Venice and Florence, gaining some knowledge of Renaissance art, and then visited relatives in Canada. He started at Birmingham a couple of weeks before his 18th birthday in 1971. Now, by this point, we're in a period where other people here are in a far better position than I am to describe Jeff's life, and I'll leave it to them if they want to fill in the rather sparse outline that I can give. Jeff got into the drug scene at Birmingham very early and started to develop perspectives that shaped the rest of his life and career. I remember at an early stage, within his first year at Birmingham, he was introducing me enthusiastically to the ideas of R.D. Laing and asserting that only the mad are truly sane. He completed his pre-clinical studies in 1974 and went on to the clinical stages, gaining his bachelor's of medicine and surgery in 1976. One of his house jobs, which formed part of his training, was at the burns unit of the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. This was one of the foremost such units in the country, and he encountered patients with terrible and life-altering injuries. I think that experience helped him, perhaps by way of self-preservation, to systematically, but also sympathetically, stand outside the pain of his patients. He embarked on an eventually unsuccessful attempt to become a physician, and he tried and frequently failed to pass his driving test. In some reason, they let him pass at a later stage. I don't really know why that was. In his early post-qualification years, Jeff was doing a number of locum jobs, and one of the locum jobs he did was for a general practitioner's practice in Fazeley. I don't know if any of you remember a three-wheeled vehicle. They probably didn't bring them here. called the Reliant Robin. Well, that was the town where Reliant Robins were made. It became iconic in the 1970s. Jeff took over the conduct of the practice for 10 days over Christmas. And the patients duly rolled up to get their usual repeat of antidepressants, which the local GP was happy to dole out. He was an Irishman who was no stranger to the bottle, and he favoured a calm life for himself, so he doled out these antidepressants. But in a foretaste of what might come later, Jeff thought that most of these patients didn't need these drugs, and he systematically stopped their prescriptions, much to the patient's annoyance. While he was at university, he became engaged to one of his fellow students, a respectable law student from a good family, and was swept up in a wave of parental congratulation and approval. That ended unhappily and abruptly when Jeff decided to cut loose, and he escaped to Barbados, where Sue Hendeles was working. Well, and Sue, I hope I'm not saying anything that's out of place here today, so you can hear and tell me if I got this wrong. But of course, Jeff's escape to Barbados went very well, and Sue and Jeff were married without either family knowing about it during the magistrate's lunch hour one day, using an eroded seashell for a ring. Jeff had then to come back to sit one of his physician's exams, his MRCP exams, and while he was in England, he undertook the tricky task of informing both his parents and Sue's, and his visit to Sue's parents, took both sides perhaps by surprise. Legend has it that Jeff felt awkward when he arrived at his new parents-in-law's house in Southport in Lancashire, and so he lay down on the floor in the middle of the room. And this was a habit of Jeff's when he felt awkward, and it was perhaps an introduction to the Hendeles family of what Sue had let herself in for. Jeff and Sue returned to medical practice in Birmingham and went to live in a small modern house in Metchley Lane near the QE hospital. Sue pursued her ambition to become an eye surgeon, and Jeff switched his interest to psychiatry, becoming a member of the Royal College of Psychiatrists in 1984, which was also the year that Simon was born. Where's Simon? Right there. Sue reminded me last night that Jeff got into trouble when Simon was born because Jeff turned up at the maternity hospital in his Afghan coat and his wild look and took Simon out for a walk. And they thought that he'd abducted the baby. He had some explaining to do. During his time as a junior psychiatrist in Birmingham, a pilot project was launched to undertake community psychiatry. It was the first such project in Britain, I think, and Jeff became either the first or one of the first community psychiatrists in Britain, visiting mentally ill patients who had been released into what was laughingly called the community as the wave of closures of the old psychiatric institutions got underway. And it was an experience that stood him in good stead when he arrived in Dunedin and was put in charge of closing the Cherry Tree Farm psychiatric unit in a similar move. He was also the psychiatric registrar at the John Connolly Hospital, working under an Irish consultant. This was the height of the IRA's bombing campaign in England, and this consultant, whose name I don't remember, but yeah, Sue will remind us, her name isn't really relevant, but she went home for Christmas to Dublin one year and was arrested at Liverpool on the way back into the country on terrorism charges, and she was held for a year before she was eventually acquitted. First person ever to be acquitted of terrorism charges, but she was acquitted of all the charges against her, and on her release, rather than coming back to work, she retired. Now, during her absence, Jeff had to take on her responsibilities as an acting consultant, but he was not eligible to fill the vacancy created by her retirement because he had not been a senior registrar. He was then faced with the prospect of having to work under someone else who was doing the job that he had been doing for the previous year. So this was a perfect moment to leave. And when the opportunity arose to come to Dunedin as a consultant, with the equivalent offer for Sue, who was in the throes of looking for consultant posts in her field, they both took the chance and moved here in 1987, followed within the year by Sue's parents, John and Ina. So Sue and Jeff made their lives here, but they separated in 1992, and Jeff moved out to Osborne, Anya Gartner joined Jeff there, and Adam was born soon afterwards, and then they moved to Waitati. Although, and I'm sure Adam won't mind me saying this, it's acknowledged on all sides that although Adam was not Jeff's biological son, Jeff regarded himself as Adam's father, and his relationship, Jeff's relationship with Anya, also didn't work out, although Nick, who is Jeff's biological son, arrived in 1994, soon after Jeff and Anya separated. It would have been quite easy for Jeff to distance himself from both boys in this situation, but he did the opposite. And he remained a real and engaged fatherly presence for both of them, as I'm sure they will say. Jeff then set about planning what was to become a great ambition, conceiving, designing, and building his dome. And I've heard in the last few days of the people who helped him do it. I'm looking at Mark Spencer over there, and he's been telling me of the cursing that he did in the process of having to build this bloody thing. But Jeff didn't like it being called the Dome. He preferred calling it the Oval Building. It was never fully completed, but it was a reality by about 2000, which is also when Kath Abbott came into Jeff's life. She was a fragile woman. I don't know whether Kath is watching this on the live streaming. She may be. Much younger than Jeff, and I'm not going to attempt to describe the relationship that the two of them had, but it developed over time. But she remained part of his life on and off until about 2013. We had seen Jeff much more often since about 2008 when Simon came to study in England, and Jeff had taken to visiting us more than he had previously, including a sabbatical he had spent in England working with Professor David Nutt on his MD-MA research, a lifelong interest of Jeff's. But then in 2015, a big and important change happened in Jeff's life. Joe Simmons had known Jeff in a work-related capacity for some time, but early that year, their relationship grew closer. Indeed, Joe tells me that today is their 8th anniversary as a couple. No one here needs me to say what a great success this relationship has been and how it has lit up the last few years of Jeff's life. So, Joe, our thoughts are particularly with you today. When Jeff and I both went to uni in 1971, our paths went in different directions. And of course, we stayed in touch and saw each other, but neither of us would say that we were particularly close in those years. But after we both had children, and especially after 2008, when Simon came to live in the UK and Jeff visited more often, we became closer again. In the last few days, I've been asking some of the many wonderful friends and neighbours who've come through Thornycroft Road to come up with 3 words to describe Jeff. What that showed was the depth of affection and respect that Jeff commanded in this community. Just looking around this building, I can see the number of people who are here, and it's a measure of that. His imagination, his kindness, his generosity, sometimes his over-generosity to a fault, his calmness, his ability to reflect and think deeply, his ability to listen, and his wisdom. But also, of course, his stubbornness, his intolerance of authority, and his contrariness. Altogether, a unique man. Now, I've been talking far too long, and others will soon have their chance to expand and correct what I've said, but it's time to move on. And before I hand over to other family members to give their reflections, I think the South Team Community Mental Health Care are going to sing us Te Arawa. You're going to come up here and do it in front of these microphones. Yes, please. Yeah. Well, we want to make sure you get recorded for the microphones. Adam will sort that. now going to have a series of personal reflections about Jeff and members of the family, and we're going to start with Simon. And after Simon has spoken, we're going to have a short period of silence, which I will wrap up by giving us a ring on the thing.
Thank you, Alex. Where to start? Dad would always say, start by chopping an onion. And the meals he created from the single, simple premise of making it up as you go along always kept us fed. One way or another, he was always feeding us, and it was hearty, nourishing food. Delicious, except maybe on occasion when he tried too hard or tried to please everyone at once. The pancakes he produced from his favorite pint glass were truly endless. He kept the burnt ones for himself and the gooey ones and the bits that fell on the floor. Him and his iron stomach, militantly and stubbornly selfless. Don't confuse food and love, he'd say, time and time again. But we never did. We loved him and his pancakes. We loved him as he doled out soup and blankets to bleary-eyed revelers curled up in the quieter crannies of the dome. Above all, we loved how he watched over us and gave us the space to grow. And in that sense, his garden was much bigger than he knew. His spirit left him standing before a newly peated plot behind the dome, quite possibly just pondering new things to plant. In life, he was content simply to scatter his own seeds, plodding along in his slow and steady way. He liked to find new paths, and where he couldn't find them, he'd make them. His vision was grounded, down to earth, eminently achievable and yet beautifully utopian. He was actually afraid of heights, and he left the hang gliding to his heroes. For all his dogged self-reliance, he found such support from an amazing community, drawing from the genius and practical wisdom of so many fantastic and fascinating friends. He was also partially colorblind and partial to acrylics and deep shades of blue and bright yellows. We would joke that he was someone who literally never saw red, and I only saw him angry once or twice. I did get mad at him though, not often, but sometimes. He could be infuriating, so I hope you hear more of. Sometimes it felt like he was letting you stew in your own silences, but he didn't need to fill a void with empty words. He was always listening and looking inside of us. He was never bored. He was never bored. And for a man who loved silences, he sure did see to it that a lot of noise was made around him. He got me my first drum kit, and my second one after that got nicked, and let us make as much noise as we wanted. And so if any of you were put out by that at any point, I'm really sorry. He helped dye my hair purple until I nearly got suspended, and then tried it on himself. Why waste perfectly good hair dye? But it was a bit too loud for him, consummate professional that he was. And besides, we all adored the radiant greys and silvers as they came through. A gentle Mithrandir with whispers that echoed in the dome like distant thunder. Seems strangely redundant to say rest in peace, because he lived in peace. And insofar as he rejected authority, it was only ever towards that end to live in peace and to rest in peace. One of my favorite memories was when we pulled over from the old road just to stand outside and stare up at the night sky in silence, awestruck by the spectrum of a rainbow made of moonlight. We also had to pee. In his friend Muhammad's words, Jeff was a beautiful star, and one Tuesday could never be enough. The memories we hold and the stories we share will still be with us next Tuesday and the Tuesday after that. And when the stars shine through in the late summer nights and in the winters when we played chess, drinking sweet liquids by the fire. There was only one house rule, by the way. You can have as many moves back as you can remember. He won the first game of chess we played as well as the last, but even though I remember the board, I can't take back any more moves. Like humble pawns, we must move forwards. I'm not sorry I left, because Dad always trusted us to make the right decisions, and like him, I'll always look to take the long way home. And I know he'd wish us a safe journey and a safe return. And as my friend Freddie says, it's easier to leave than be left behind. You didn't like being the center of attention, but now it's not up to you. It's for us to decide, and we'll cherish you and your wonderful life in every way we know how. So thanks, Dad, and thank you all for being here with us.
We're going to take a moment of quiet and reflection.
Kia ora. So, my name is Nicholas, Jeff's son. There's a lot of things that I could talk about in terms of, I was very blessed having Jeff as my dad, and growing up I was exposed to a whole lot of ideas, especially through his relationship with Kath and the conversations that they would have. They had a really profound influence on the way I see the world and my perspective. And but what I'm going to talk about today is mainly just about my relationship with him, and kind of like what I think his perspective on art is. He might not agree with it, but it's what I feel like he taught me through it. So when I was 5 years old, I moved away from my dad, and I would come and visit him every holidays. And this whole process of leaving him and then coming and going in and out of his life, it was really quite difficult on both of us. And in some ways, I think it actually defined who I am as a person. So when I was visiting as a child, I was often quite, depressed with feelings of, these feelings of building and breaking these attachments. And I think it was similar for my dad. And my dad would encourage me to make art. And sometimes the art I would make was a bit dark and heavy sometimes. Still is a little bit, to be honest. But as I got older, I feel like I started to appreciate and understand the kind of art that my dad would make a lot more, and especially his appreciation for using a lot of color. So the art Dad made was quite reflective of who he was, to me anyway. I think so. It was really light and colorful. He enjoyed just getting really messy with really vivid colors and not really taking it too seriously. Doodling loose patterns and abstract landscapes. To me, in a lot of his art, there's a real optimism in them. Yeah. So Jeff had this belief that you can find beauty in anything and everything, and that by finding that beauty, it can give you a deeper appreciation for life. Dad had a lot of love, and he gave it out very freely, and I think sometimes he spread himself quite thin, being such a generous and giving person through both his professional life, through his personal life and his professional life as a psychiatrist. And a big part of Dad was this duality between taking on board lots of sadness and empathizing, but from this he also gained a deep appreciation for the richness of life. I remember Dad telling me how every patient he met was like reading huge novels that make you appreciate the different aspects of life in quite a humbling way. I remember Dad telling me about how when he was a young man, he would be at parties with people who were running around taking drugs and all that shit. And while everyone else was having a great time partying, he would be sitting down and thinking about and being really concerned about all of the wars and tragedies going on in the world. And I remember asking him why he should bother to care about things that he was totally helpless to change. And I remember him telling me that he believed that even if you can't help, it still matters, just the act of knowing and empathizing and caring about these things and the world and people. So when I was a kid, I would always ask Dad random questions, and one day I remember asking him what he thought the meaning of life was. He asked me what I thought, and I said to learn and to try and make sense of and understand the world around us and what it means. And then Dad told me how through his life he had really kind of had this belief that kind of drove him that the purpose of life was to try and make things better. Whether you achieve it or not, it's the act of trying, you know? And so I want now to share a poem by Mikhail Yurovich that when I first heard it, it really reminded me quite deeply of Jeff. It's called I Go Out on the Road Alone. The other thing I'll just quickly say is I also printed out a whole bunch of Dad's art, so if anyone wants any of it, there's heaps of copies there if anyone wants to take a piece away with them. So it's called I Go Out on the Road Alone. Alone I set out on the road. The flinty path is sparkling in the mist. The night is still. The desert harks to God and star with star converses. The vault is overwhelmed with solemn wonder. The earth in cobalt aura sleeps. Why do I feel so pained and troubled? What do I harbor? Hope? Regrets? I see no hope in years to come. Have no regrets for things gone by. All that I seek is peace and freedom, to lose myself in sleep, but not the frozen slumber of the grave. I'd like eternal sleep to leave, my life force dozing in my breast, gently with my breath to rise and fall. By night and day, my hearing would be soothed, by voices sweet, singing to me of love, and over me forever green, a dark oak tree would bend and rustle.
Next, it's Adam.
Yeah, is that right? Jeffrey, where do I start? I miss you. I'm Jeffrey's kind of son. He's not my father by blood, but he's been as much of a father to me as my biological father, not more or less, just equal. It's been a balancing act I've been playing my whole life, trying to keep both fathers happy and not picking favourites. Gordon, if you're listening, I love you too, and I miss you, and I think of you every day. Jeffrey picked up on the fact that it was a constant balancing act for me. He was so good at that. He always understood exactly what was going on and the emotions underlying it. I think that this is one of the things that attracted so many people to him. He was so good at understanding people. He wouldn't pass judgment, he would just sit there and listen. He once told me when teaching me how to take a history from a patient, ask your question and then listen to their answer. If they don't answer immediately, don't interrupt them because you're anxious that you may have offended them. It may be that they're just thinking about your question. Whenever I would encounter something tricky in life, I'd call up Jeffrey and ask his advice, as I know so many of you out there would do the same. He always gave such sensible and calming advice. As I've been getting older, I've been getting more aware of the fact that Jeffrey unfortunately would not always be around to offer his sensible, calming advice, and so started probing him on ideas that I thought were important in forming his perspective on the world, so that one day when he was no longer, when I would eventually have to say goodbye to him too, I would at least have some clues to help guide me through the rest of my life when he no longer can. One of those little gems he put me onto was a book called The Book of Joy. This book documented an encounter of the Archbishop Desmond Tutu travelling to Dharamsala to visit His Holiness the Dalai Lama for his 80th birthday. The two men spent a week discussing a single burning question: how do we find joy in the face of suffering? I listened to it again on the way down, and again found it very helpful for me reframing my grief. It was discussed the idea of passing through suffering and the importance of humour and being able to laugh at yourself and others in spite of suffering, not in a mean way, but in a warm-hearted, human being related to human being way. I'm going to read a passage to you, as I hope it may bring you a little smile. I read it to Jeffrey when he was here, and he certainly enjoyed it. It says, during the week, their fingers were often wagging at each other teasingly. Moments before their hands were clasped together affectionately. During our first lunch, the Archbishop told the story of a talk they were giving together. As they were getting ready to walk on stage, the Dalai Lama, world's icon of compassion and peace, pretended to choke his spiritual older brother. The Archbishop then turned to the Dalai Lama and said, "Hey, the cameras are almost on us. Act like a holy man." So these two men remind us how we choose to act each day is what matters. Even holy men have to act like holy men. But if we think holy men act serious and severe, pious and reserved, it is hardly how these two greet the world or each other. The last year, I had quite a special time with Jeffrey. I'd flown down to come hang out with him for a couple of days. And so he came out to pick me up from the airport in his little green electric car. He was running a bit late and took the fast road with the car not being 100% charged. And on the way back, about halfway up the old road, the battery went flat. We called up poor old Jo, who had just driven back from Wanaka, where she'd been doing some work, and naturally she wasn't super stoked to get the phone call that she needed to do some more driving, but kindly obliged and came and rescued us. After arriving home and mucking around for a bit, Jeffrey started getting more and more anxious about having his car sitting on the side of the road, and so we decided to go back out and get the tow truck to rescue the car. Jo dropped us off and we sat there waiting for the tow truck, and during the time we were sitting there immobile in his green car, watching the lights of Dunedin below, I got to pick his beautiful mind on the events of his past that had shaped the person he had become. He told me about how he first got into the Quakers. At a very young age, a friend of his, Fabian, would go with his family to the Quaker meetings, and so Jeff would tag along. Fabian and his family then went away for a little while, and Jeffrey decided that he'd keep going on his own. 12-year-old little Jeffrey would then walk the few kilometres from his house to go and attend the Quaker meetings on his own, and he'd continue this practice throughout the rest of his life. I asked him about his time parenting us and how intentional the lessons and values that he'd passed down to us were. He said that his entire approach to parenting was to try to give us as much freedom as possible without letting us hurt ourselves. And this is exactly what he did. I asked him what it was like when he lost his mum, and he said he cried the whole plane ride back to England. We talked like this probably for an hour or so, and then eventually the tow truck pulled up, and Jeffrey greeted him and explained where to go, and the tow truck guy said, "Yeah, I remember you. I think I came and bailed you out last time you ran out of charge." I feel very blessed to have so many of these lovely moments with Jeffrey. The last memory I wanted to share with you developed for me over time. It probably started for me about 8 years ago when I was doing a psychiatric placement with Jeffrey down here. I followed him around for about 6 weeks, and in that time started to develop some insights into one of the major influences that has shaped our beautiful Jeffrey. I watched as he would listen to the suffering of his patients that came to see him in that same calm and non-judgmental way that he would when I would call him up with my worries. Over the 6-week placement, I helped Jeffrey to clean up the dome and started to realize that helping to bear everyone's troubles did take a certain toll on Jeffrey. The thing I didn't realize until later was that it was only by sharing in other people's suffering that Jeffrey was able to develop that deep, calm compassion that so many of us here are so strongly drawn to. And if I may quote the Dalai Lama once more, if we develop concern for other people's welfare, share other people's suffering and help them, ultimately we will benefit. If we think only of ourselves and forget about others, ultimately we will lose. The more we care for the happiness of others, the greater our own sense of well-being becomes. The dome burnt down shortly after that placement, and Jeffrey retired not long after that. Over that time, I wrote a song for Jeffrey, really about the dome and my experiences over the preceding few months. I played it for him in various stages of development. He never really liked my music much, and I don't think the song was any exception. I finally finished it the night after I heard about Jeff's passing, sitting under the stars and the burnt remnants of the dome. I hope you'll like it a bit more now that it's finished, Jeffrey. The song's called Until the Next Time, Old Friend. Excuse me, I should have been better set up. Give me your demons, I'll keep them in a box under the stairs. Secrets you'll share them, then your burden I will bear. And though I know it feels all wrong, beauty lasts forever once it's gone. Goodbye, old friend, I can't wait to see you again. Goodbye, until next time. The walls, I can't see them, they're coming down on me. The stairwell to ashes and all that lies beneath. No, I know it feels all wrong. Beauty lasts forever once it's gone. Goodbye, old friend. I can't wait to see you again. Goodbye, until next time. Goodbye, until the next time. Goodbye, old friend. I can't wait to see you again.
So I'm Jo, I'm Jeff's partner. I spent the last sort of few days trying to think about something to say today to really put down in words what Jeff meant to be to me, but every time I stop and think, the more my mind is in disbelief that Jeff is actually gone. But just sort of like to say how honoured I feel to have spent the last 8 years with Jeff. These times have been wonderful. He was an incredible partner and best friend. Jeff was so gentle and kind, and he was always there to offer wise counsel and provide guidance and support. When I'd come home from work and I'd sort of like offload and we'd just sit, and he would always, he wouldn't need to say much. He would just kind of be there, and Jeff would always give the biggest hugs, and that warmed on my heart. And every day, even if I was a bit annoyed with him, he would say, "I love you." And it'd be like, "I love you," but I can be annoyed with you sometimes. But Jeff enjoyed, when we first met, Jeff enjoyed lots of adventures, but he also really enjoyed just being at home and in his garden and just spending time together and with friends. But our last adventure overseas was to meet Jeff's granddaughter Trudy, and this was a very special time for him, and she is adorable, and their connection was very special. They would sit side by side on the sofa, and they each had their own wee book, and it's like this wee connection going on. And I remember in LA they were sort of playing music together, and it was really, they shared smiles, and just sort of, she would go up and just touch him on the leg and just stand there and look at him, and she got the opportunity this year to come and visit Jeff's place in Waitati, and he was just so excited about that. It was really good. So our last walk around the garden, it was magical. It was a beautiful day. The sun was shining, and we had gone to take some photos of some lilies that had come into bloom. They stood 6 foot tall, and I said, I'll send these photos to my Lily, who always says, "I'm taller than you," and she's not. She's definitely shorter than me. And I was like, these lilies are taller than me. We sat, after taking some photos, we sat on the bank and talked for a bit, and then we walked down towards the house, and soon after that Jeff had gone on a new adventure of his, sort of without me. And where he left, I would go and I'd sit and I'd have my morning cup of tea, and I would look out and look behind me, and just right behind me on the bank is where his sweet dog Honey is buried. And my other view is of the beautiful Blueskin Bay. It is the most magical spot, and it would have been a perfect place to have left from. And here in this place, I can see him in the trees, standing tall and strong, in the ocean, dancing in the moving tides. I see him in the rainbows, colourful and free. I hear him in the wind and the bird song, and I feel him in my heart, and I feel his arms around me. So my Jeffy, I feel like we've known each other a lifetime or two. I don't think this was our first dance together, and I don't think it'll be our last. So until we meet again, my beautiful Jeffy, I will miss you, and my heart is broken. Thank you.
So now, the members of the mixtape choir are going to sing for us a number of songs. Perhaps they come up here and we can sort out the microphones and things.
Sharing all the world, you Jeffrey and Joe. Somewhere over the rainbow, way up high, there's a land that I've heard of once in a lullaby. Somewhere over the rainbow, skies are blue, and the dreams that you dare to dream really do come true. Someday I wish upon a star and wake up when the clouds are far behind me, where troubles melt like lemon drops away above the chimney tops. It's where you'll find me, somewhere over the rainbow. Bluebirds fly, birds fly over the rainbow. Why then, oh why can't I? Why can't I? We're now going to sing Hallelujah, and we'd love you to join in with us in the chorus or any of the words that you know. Leonard Cohen was a favourite of Jeff's and of all of ours as we grew up together. my best, it wasn't much. I couldn't feel, so I tried to touch. I told the truth, I didn't come to fool ya. And even though it all went wrong, I'll stand before the Lord a song with nothing on my tongue but hallelujah. 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 Hallelujah.
Thank you very much. I turn now to read you 3 tributes written by Jeff's sister-in-law. Once Adam's got the microphone sorted out for me. I'm going to read 3 tributes by Jeff's sister-in-law, my wife Sandy, and by our daughters, Jeff's nieces, Kathy and Lydia Layton. Sadly, none of them have been able to make the journey to be with us, but all of them very much wanted to, and they've asked me to read their tributes. I hope that some or all of them may actually be able to hear this on the live stream. Let me start with Sandy's. Jeff gave me a small painting for my birthday around Christmas time one year, which I treasure. He titled the painting Local Produce from Marlborough. It was apparent that he wanted to bring us warmth and love from New Zealand, his summer feelings, so different from the drab, cold winter of London. The painting illustrated the huge distance between us, his life on the other side of the world. Jeff was very aware of the distance between England and New Zealand when his mother was ill in hospital, and when he said goodbye, it was painful as he knew he would never see her again. He clearly thought a great deal when executing this painting and wanted to stay connected with us despite the distance and infrequency of his visits. In the center of the painting was a dark green fir tree laden with red fruit. Interestingly, the scarlet fruits were made to look like baubles on a Christmas tree. The background was alive with green foliage, but there were glimpses of darker colors behind the vivid green. Just as Jeff layered the painting with darker colors, followed by lighter green colors, I think it represented layers in his own feelings. One of the darker colors were unhappy feelings of being uprooted whenever he returned to the UK, a place he had needed to escape from when he was younger. Jeff did not articulate his feelings often, but conveyed his emotions through actions. He was generous, often bearing gifts as he came. The gift of the painting was an example of his showing me how he felt, and it makes me sad to be such a long way away and not be able to be there to say goodbye. Then my older daughter Kathy, a woman now in her 30s, starting to my dear Uncle Jeff, one of our encounters in my childhood, you gave me a book of poetry by the poet Rumi. Had I heard of him, you asked. I had not. The 13th century Sufi mystic sat well outside of my small world at that time. But the words that flowed out of that book spoke of love, serenity, and peace. They spoke of a higher power that lived not somewhere above the rafters of austere Anglican churches, looking down on us from on high, as was my understanding, but of a higher power that existed in all elements of nature and in every human interaction, much more appealing. In the back of the book was a CD, which had some of the poems set to music by a country western band. I had the smallest inkling, just on the fringes of my understanding, that 13th century Sufi mystic poetry set to country western music might be an unusual combination. But no matter, I was completely captivated. And it was with that music that I feel my own individual relationship with you began. It was to grow through our many subsequent meetings as I continued to learn more about you and your broad, inquiring and contemplative worldview. I am so bitterly sad that I did not manage to get out to New Zealand to spend proper time with you, as I had always planned. But I'm so grateful for all those visits you made to the UK, for the time we were able to spend together, and for the fact that my partner Tom could get to know you and love you as I do. It gives me comfort to know that you touched and inspired so many people. I know that threads of your influence exist in all of them, and these threads weave together to form your community. I also know that while distance is a barrier, those threads run through me too, and I'm happy to be a part of that great tapestry which will continue to channel the essence of you. Goodbye, Uncle Jeff. Much love. Kathy. And then thirdly from Lydia, also a woman in her 30s. I'm so sad not to be there today, celebrating an amazing man among friends and family. So I'm sending all the love and hugs to everyone. My Uncle Jeff, even though living a world away was always a key part of my life, I've always looked forward to seeing him and speaking to him, and I feel very grateful for every moment I spent with him. I always found him, as I'm sure many have, a kindred spirit, and even though years passed between seeing each other, I always felt an incredible connection with him, as if no time had passed at each meeting. To me, he was timeless and always held an almost mystical role in my mind, this otherworldly person who could travel all the way from the wilds of New Zealand and wear sandals in London in the winter, in the rain and shine. I never grew out of this perspective, as when I got older I fell in love with the Lord of the Rings, and after a trip when I was 11 with the country of New Zealand itself, the beautiful nature and the nomadic holiday we all went on together, exploring the different terrains and beautiful spectacles of South Island, fully confirmed in my mind that Jeff was the Gandalf of our family. I will always remember Jeff as a gentle and kind man with a great philosophical mind. He thought deeper and bigger than others and prioritized the little things in life. Every conversation I had with him pushed me to consider things more and to look more kindly on my experiences. But mostly, I remember he had the greatest smile that would emanate out and bring peace to those around him. He was greatly loved and will be greatly missed, but never forgotten. We come now to contributions from some of the many friends and acquaintances and colleagues of Jeff, and we've a half dozen people I'm going to ask initially to come, and then I'll ask others who want to say words to say some words. First of all, Ibrahim Tagavi, will you come and make your remarks? Thank you.
I'm Abraham, and we know each other. A lot of you, we know each other. And tell you about Jeff first time when I saw him first time. I was in New Zealand with my wife and 2 kids, 5 and 3 years old. And one day I was coming out from the hospital, a very great, kind lady, psychiatrist, Margaret Nicholson, said, Abraham, do you want to come to my place for lunch this weekend? I said, where is your house? He said, Port Charmer. We didn't know anything about Port Charmer. So we got a taxi and went there. Who was there? Mr. Jeff. And Simon, around 3 years old. My son was almost 3. And Margaret, with her amazing talent, he prepared amazing food, seafood, which I did not eat. I was vegetarian. And on the table, I didn't know how to deal with this table. Jeff was sitting opposite to me. You know, you like Jeff, the way he looked. He was full of oppositional forces and very real, which very difficult to be real. So I managed to hide and eat just a salad, not the food. And when we were coming out, Jeff had a car and we didn't. He offered me to ride, give a ride to town. And during the way, he said, Abraham, you didn't eat anything. I was watching you, you're having just a salad. Why didn't you come to my place? I'll make you a good food. That was the beginning. Facing with this man, privilege for us to know Jeff and Sue. And we have been friends since. Our friendship has become stronger every day. We were talking about Hafez, Saadi, Rumi, as she passed the book, Tunis, and Omar Khayyam, and English literature and writers and poets. And when I started the job, I was assigned to work in 9B Cherry Farm. And Jeff was assigned to work in HB, rehabilitation. Always used to complain, Abraham, this patient, they don't need to be in the hospital. We have to discharge them. And sense of community psychiatrist. And he was very stubborn, and he managed to discharge a few very sick people. But he was able to manage them. And then when he started working in outpatient group, which was a group of very difficult cases, borderline, anorexic, and those cases, who would accept these cases? Jeff. Big heart. Very, very, very brave. And very able. We used to talk about a lot of those cases together. And I was a teacher, and I tell you about a bit of mind that I think, according to the frontiers, that they were thinking about the mind. In my teaching, I used to tell my students, our mind is like a building. There is a foundation, and the process of building this building, and this building has stories, and rooms. Each room has function. And then you put the furniture in. Some furniture is in front of your eyes, you can see them. Some you have to look for it. Some you look for it and you don't find it. Conscious, unconscious. You know, you see it or you don't. Jeff was able to get to these buildings in his patients. And he used to work with them in outpatient group. And very, very curious. And very able. And we used to discuss it. And I used to enjoy him, the way he looked at these patients. And we used to talk hours and hours about this. He was able to really to search himself, his own building, in different ways, his own specific ways, which not many people even think about it, to look at themselves in a deep sense. But he was able to do it, and he was doing it, like he was playing with fire, to get close to himself and to see those things that is hidden in him. And we used to talk about it. So he used to work in the operation group, and I used to work at Waikari later on, 9B. And we used to see each other in the family setup with Sue and Simon. Simon became a buddy friend of my son, Kia. And yesterday they saw each other. I noticed that they're, sitting next to each other, and reminded me of those days. I can talk hours and hours about Jeff. But what I can tell you is this. If you see Jeff, there is something that attracts you about him. That was him being real. Very difficult to be real. And he was real, and he had a lot of things to offer to a lot of people with different tastes. Like me from the East, and he from the West. We used to really be very, very good friends and share a lot of things. So Jeff really, I used to see him as a person who was full of, as I said, opposite forces. I used to do calligraphy, and some days, and we were there, and I said, Jeff, do you have any paper, those glassy paper? His house was not very tidy. But he was tidy. He was really tidy. I remember he used to stand and go between these books, choose one of those books and open it and give me a piece of glassy paper. He was on the surface, a few times I told him, Jeff, how did you know? But he was tidy in certain level, which amazed you, you look and say, whoa. So I miss him. Really, I do miss him. I never forget him. His memory will stay in me forever. Such a good friend, such a generous, real generous, brave, very good. Thank you very, very, very much, and I talk too much about me.
Thank you
Thank you.
I'm Al, or Alistair. I just thank, what a wonderful occasion, really. Thanks for everyone putting this together. It's really beautiful. And thanks for the opportunity for me to say a few things in celebration of Jeff's life. Well, thanks. Yeah, we can keep going? Cool. So look, it was my absolute privilege to have Jeff as a friend and a colleague for the past 23 years. We met soon after I arrived in Dunedin to train as a psychiatrist, and we were immediate friends. I mean, things people have reflected on, you just that instant, I knew this guy was going to be in my life. I agree. Actually, before I crack into my thing, I've got something from James Knight, who many of you will also know, who's mopping up in Napier, so couldn't make it. But he wanted me to share some thoughts and reflections on Jeff. So Jeff, this is from James. You're an older brother to me for a decade at the end of the last millennium. And Waitati was our home, and my memory of you is intertwined with my memory of that place and that time. I learnt so much from you, some of which cannot be spoken of in a public forum. Yeah, I've got my censorship thing on too. I remember you saying to me once, the important thing about boundaries is not to never cross them, but to know when you have crossed them. And that's my indelible memory of you, Jeff. You were always on the boundary, an anarchic mess of contradictions, but a beautiful and unique mess. I loved you then, and I love you now. Aroha nui from James. So as I was saying, look, I was really lucky and fortunate to spend a lot of time with Jeff. Worked alongside him in South Team, and carpooled to work with Dave, and they were some memorable trips, Dave? And then a peer group that every weekend we'd have some wonderful lunches afterwards with. So it's so nice seeing all your colleagues here to remember them. And so I'm really grateful for that time. So look, this is for you, Jeff. I mean, on behalf of your colleagues, thank you for all your hard work. And look, he was a really hard worker. He had huge caseloads of people that he saw tirelessly. And for over 30 years, dedicating your life to practicing psychiatry here in Dunedin. And thank you for practicing for such integrity and maintaining a passion and interest in psychiatry. You always kept abreast of new developments and knowledge, and you always practiced with a very high ethical standard. And thanks for sharing your wisdom, bringing a different, new and helpful point of view to clinical issues and challenges. He certainly was different. And thanks for encouraging and discouraging junior staff. Thanks for your support of your colleagues and fighting repeatedly for services to be improved and maintained. Thanks for fighting to keep the focus on what's important, looking after patients and their welfare rather than data gathering and bureaucracy, which, as many of you appreciate, isn't Jeff's cup of tea. I'm being presumptuous, and I'm going to thank you on behalf of your patients and say thank you for all the care that you provided. Thanks for your kindness, your humility, your genuine interest in people's lives and challenges, and never ever giving up on people. That was something that was amazing about Jeff. He never gave up on the most difficult people, just carried on and carried on. In your time working here, you helped hundreds of people transition from institutional care in Cherry Farm to live fuller and freer and more rewarding lives in the community. You strongly believed in people's rights to self-determination and to live as free and full a life as possible. And I really admire your integrity in standing up for that on behalf of your patients, often if that created conflict with people around you. You helped to introduce and maintain outpatient groups, which Abraham was reflecting on, and art therapy in Dunedin, through hundreds of outpatients through student health and at the South Team. And I know recently your work at Ashburn Clinic and other locums was greatly valued. And as I covered Jeff a lot in our work, I really know how genuinely understood and cared for his patients felt, and how hard it was for them and also for Jeff when he retired. They were very deep relationships that he formed with people. Lastly, Jeff, I want to thank you for being such a great friend through good and bad times. Your rebelliousness, you really were a rebel, stubbornness, your wicked sense of humour, and that wonderful smile that's, people have mentioned, that just lit up the room. I'll always cherish that, never forget that. Your unpredictability, always keep us on our toes, jumping out of the car, mid lights, yeah. But also your courage in carrying on through challenges such as the loss of the dome. That was really inspiring, the way you just ploughed on. But what I'm most going to cherish, and I won't ever forget, is your generosity, which we've heard of before, and your kindness and warmth of spirit. That was huge. So look, kia kaha, Jeff. It's been a pleasure, and go well, brother.
So, Chris and Sue, would you like to come and say something?
Well, we've been friends with Jeff for over 50 years. It was 1972 that Sue and I were in our first year at university at Birmingham, living in a hall of residence called Mason Hall. When we heard stories circulating amongst the students of this very strange guy who'd been living in the hall the year before. So back in 1972, Jeff Layton was already a legend. I heard how he and his roommate had transformed the very tidy study bedrooms that we all had into a magical-looking den, draped with Indian cotton prints, rugs and cushions, smell of incense wafting down the corridors.
And other things.
And other things. Jeff had a reputation for making eye contact with people and then just looking. Without talking, freaking out all the straight little middle-class students. Well, one evening I walked into the student bar at Mason Hall and found him, this was the first time I'd ever seen him, found him sitting in a corner and I sat down beside him, and that was the start of a very long friendship.
It wasn't until my third year as a student that I realised that Chris was to be the love of my life. And also when I discovered the psychedelic world. I don't know how much the two are connected, but they are connected. I was living in a horrible bedsit in the infamous York Road, where Jeff was often to be found. I went around to visit mutual friends who'd lived in a notorious flat. Entering with some trepidation, I was met by an unusual guy in a bright yellow jacket and long hair. He invited me to go upstairs. There was graffiti all over the walls and huge letters of warning. "We are the people our parents warned us about." I found Jeff already up there, quietly sitting in a smoke-filled attic room, and loved his quiet demeanour. We became friends instantly. Well,
After many magical experiences together in Birmingham, surprisingly we all graduated, and we stayed in touch with Jeff, despite living in different cities. One day, Sue and I were living and working in London. We were excited and a bit surprised to find Jeff on our doorstep. That evening, the tale unravelled. Jeff declared he was flying to Barbados the next day. and was going to marry Sue Hendley's. This was a bit of a surprise to us. I mean, they were both good friends, but we had no idea that any sort of relationship was going on there. So I asked him, does Sue know about this? to which he sheepishly replied, not yet. They married in Barbados, and the next time we saw them both was at their marriage celebration in London, at Alex's parents' house in Wimbledon.
In 1982, we escaped from London, much to our relief, and moved to New Zealand. It was the most crazy and wonderful thing we've ever done together, despite lots of other adventures. I was pregnant with my daughter Zoe. A few years later, Jeff and Sue came out to visit us with a toddler Simon. This was a very different environment, especially for Simon, but they adapted well and were soon applying for jobs in Dunedin. It wasn't long before they moved here permanently. We raised our children together, shared holidays, enjoyed many a good curry. There was a possum living in the wall at Birchfield Avenue, and one night it made a grand entrance right across the dining room table and escaped rapidly into the fern-filled valley to our relief. Birchfield Avenue was the first time we became aware of Spencer's building prowess. He constructed a beautiful deck in front of the house there.
Yeah, and in recent years, it's been wonderful having Jeff live close by in Waitati. We've always been able to drop in on each other. Jeff has been a wonderful support to us when we've had difficult times, such as the death of our parents. And he even came to my mother's funeral in London. We'd often join him on the beach, walking Honey, even though Honey and Jeff didn't walk quite as far as we did. We've spent so many magical times together, watching eclipses, sunsets, sunrises, rainbows, partying in the dome, dance parties, parties in our paddock. Jeff and I would often just sit quietly by the fire, sharing our thoughts, or more often than not, just in silence, or sitting on our deck, drinking gin, eating cheese. At so many of these events, Jeff and I have been observing with love the very cool things going on around us, the beautiful people that have gathered around him.
Jeff is the kindest, most generous person we've ever known. We will miss him terribly.
Thank you both for that tribute to Jeff. Now, Marco, are you here somewhere? Would you like to come and say something? I thought I caught sight of you. Yeah, Marco, come and say something. And Dina? Marco and Athena.
Kia ora. I'm going to ask Athena to say a few words about her childhood impressions of Jeff. I've written something as well, and it's interesting hearing that Jeff had a dyslexia because I've written the same thing so many different times, and it's interesting that you can interpret things in so many different ways.
Hello. Can you hear me? Visits with Jeff have become anchor points in time. His lounge, a time capsule, one that always had its doors open for the spontaneous visitor. The fire crackling against a mild Dunedin afternoon. Shuffling in next to a sleeping honey on the couch for a generous offering of nachos, storytelling, and hours that would just evaporate into the night. As a child in the early 90s, my memories of Jeff were colourful, comforting, playful, and often speckled in UV paint. This mystical journeyer, with wizard-like silhouette and calm, sparkling eyes, has left a powerful imprint on my own ideas about life and death. Jeff was an artist in seeing into the patterns of nature's playful creativity. This curious playfulness carries through all of my memories with you, Jeff. Peering out at the rain as we camped on Canaan Downs, pancakes on the gas cooker in the travelling version of your Waitati lounge. Little legs dawdling behind you and Dad, wondering curiously how adults became to walk so slowly and gently. Sneaking away to uncover hidden treasure in the pirate ship that was the Dome remains. Fingers crossed behind back that we would be allowed to take home a piece of the charred magic. The answer was always yes. Later years, visits were served with gentle, grounding, and often humorous suggestions on how to navigate the neurological perils of young adulthood, accompanied with a strong poured gin. Later still, I would cross paths with you and Joe on the way to a UV-lit dance floor, or maybe back to camp to make more nachos together. We would walk slowly, gently. You stopping briefly to turn your face up to a star-scattered sky with a smile I'll remember like a cosmic giggle. Thank you for these moments suspended in space, for sharing your infinite knowledge, caregiving, and creativity, accumulated through time and forever expanding in novel connectedness. Thank you, Jeff, my wisest and oldest friend.
Thank you, Sheila. Thanks. I first met Jeff in the early 90s at Quaker meeting with friends and was intrigued by the way he lived simply but with texture and color. Jeff described with passion a group of parents who were creating a shared space for children to play. This care and generosity for others featured in Jeff's outlook on life. The idea of the creative shared space grew into a vision for the ellipsoid round building? Oval building. Thank you. In his Waitati garden. Jeff was involved with the local art therapy community, hosting events at the Oval Building, along with all manner of local community gatherings and stonking parties. His empathy was off the scale. In his role as a psychiatrist, he brought an authentic and ancient together with new and up-to-date thinking around psychedelics. tirelessly battling to care for his patients, friends, family, and community. Sadly, when the dome burnt down, it felt like the end of an era, only to be eclipsed by his recent passing. A visit to see Jeff was always an occasion to look forward to. His cups of tea and pancakes were legendary. It was like sharing pipes with Gandalf, and a ride in his car with Zaphod in his spaceship, the Heart of Gold. Jeff combined a gentle innocence with a deep wisdom truly to behold. I am left to ponder the many answers and questions of friendship and life. So if you see me with my head bent down, peering into a swampy pool, I'm probably communing with my dear old friend nature. Sleep, peaceful friend Jeff. When you awake, how your hair has grown longer still. When you walk, you leave sparks in the sky. When you smile, you've got a frog in your eye. And in a blink, you say goodbye.
I was thinking about writing something down. I decided not to and just kind of freestyle it a bit because life isn't scripted. I'm now wishing I kind of had. My name is Sam DeVell Smith, for those who don't know me. My father was too unwell to be here today. I asked him if there was anything that he would like me to pass on from him. First he said that he couldn't think of anything, and then I'll ask him again this morning that he thought that anything that he could come up with would be inadequate. And I understand that feeling now. I consider Adam here my oldest and one of my best friends. Jeff has been a staple of my life for as long as I can ever remember. What was I going to say? I never quite understood things like this as a young child, but I thoroughly appreciate it now. And was lucky enough to be able to bottle that up and keep it as a wee talisman and token of Jeff. 4 or 5 years ago, shortly after meeting Marco, Jeff and I were in his lounge talking, and he referred to Marco as the kindest and most generous man he knew. Words that have come up a few times today. And upon thinking about that evening, I figured out that Jeff was the kindest and most generous person I knew. It doesn't really need to be said again and again, but I will say it because he deserves it. Little stories or something. You know, running up and down the Macrocaba hedge from the dome with Adam and Nick when they were off on holidays in school, and jumping and swinging on the willow branches that hang down. It probably fucking destroyed the tree. But Jeff never told us off. Oh hell. Maybe something a little funny, like the other day when helping them clean a room in the house, I had to empty the vacuum cleaner, and the wind changed direction as I was doing so, and I got a load of dust in the face, quite a bit up my nose, and it just made me chuckle that sort of even then, as he always has been and forever will be a part of me. I love you, Jeff. Cheers.
And now Sarah Darrell.
Kia ora koutou. I'm Sarah. This is Brian and Micaiah. And Brian met Jeff about 30-something years ago, and me not long after that. And we said we wanted to read a poem. It's really hard to find a poem that's kind of sufficient for Jeff, because he's wonderful, constant, carpet sweeping, and kind. And we're all bereft. And of course he lives in everyone's hearts and memories, particularly his darling Joe and 3 wonderful boys, and Alex and Sandy and the girls, Anya, Sue. But we've also been thinking about his amazing trees, and there must be dozens of 25-year-old kauri tree around here because he came back from up north once with hundreds and gave them away, and they're going to keep growing for like hundreds of years. And the beautiful Thornycroft Road property that he imagined and planted with all those lovely, lovely trees, and it's just beautiful bush that is legacy forever. So we settled on a poem about trees. And it's called Hope, and it's by a woman from Wellington who had trained as a psychotherapist called Dinah Hawken. So it's to do with trees, being amongst trees. It's to do with tree ferns, mamaku, ponga, wheki. Shelter under here is so easily understood. You can see that trees know how it is to be bound into the earth and how it is to rise defiantly into the sky. It's to do with death, the great slip in the valley when there's nothing left but to postpone all travel and wait in the low gut of the gully for water, wind and seeds. It's to do with waiting. Shall we wait with the trees? Shall we wait with, for and under trees? Since of all creatures, they know the most about waiting, and slowly strengthening is the great thing in grief we can do. It's always bleak at the beginning, but trees are calm about nothing, which they believe will give rise to something, flickering and swaying as they are. So lucid is their knowledge of green.
Thank you all for your moving tributes to Jeff. We've got time now for more contributions. If anyone would like to come up and say a few words about Jeff, does anybody who would like to do that? Mark. I'd like you to say whatever you want.
Hey?
Say whatever you want until it goes arrested.
Howdy all. Yeah, I'm Mark Spencer. Spence, as most people know me. This is my bit of madness. Seems sort of funny in ways, but it seems sort of appropriate to be having Jeff's last hurrah here, seeing I was also a wee bit involved in his dome. When I first met Jeff, it was quite funny because I was given this name. I was asked if I wanted to go and do some work, some design building, whatever, for this guy, Jeff, psychiatrist. I went, oh yeah, this came from Sue's father. So I went round to this place just to knock on the door, and all I was told was, Jeff's a psychiatrist. Righto, okay, not a problem. I went round there, knocked on the door, and this dude answered the door, and he's got long grey hair, and his eyes are sort of half closed. He's either just woken up or he's stoned or something. I said, that didn't matter, you know, but I said, I'm looking for Jeff. And he says, that's me. And I went, oh, yeah, okay, how are you? I introduced myself. And he says, oh, you better come in. So I went in and we were chatting away, and, you know, within a very short time we were sort of like old mates and blah, blah, talking about life and the world and everything and buildings and stuff. And he said to me, he says, you looked a bit surprised when I came to the door. And I said, yeah, well, I sort of was, I suppose. I mean, you know, I made the stupid mistake of saying, well, you didn't appear like a psychiatrist to me. He says, you don't look like an architect. Yeah, okay. So anyway, we got on well, and as I said, it's sort of fitting that he's having his last bloody hurrah here. I feel humbled that this is going on here. I feel very honoured that Joe and all you guys asked if he could do it, because, you know. Anyway, we did quite a few building projects over the years, but the last one I did for him was, he came to me one day and he said, I want you to build me a room. And I went, okay, where are we going with this one? He said, I says, what sort of room, Jeff? He says, just a room. He says, but I want an oval room. And I went, oh shit, okay, righto. How are we going to do this? He says, actually, he says, I don't want an oval room, I want an elliptoid room. And I went, oh, fucking what? Anyway, we went on to this, went through the motions of trying to work out how big he wanted it. Was it standalone? Was it added to something? Was it part of this? Was it part of that? No, it's not very big, he says. And I says, how big's not very big? Oh, from about here to over there. And I went, oh, Jesus Christ, right. And I said, wait, what's this going to be made of? And what's it for? And he says, anything. I'm going, oh, fuck. Righto. Come on, somewhere. Is it a kitchen? Is it a living room? Is it this? Is it, what is this room going to be? He says, I want to do anything in it. And I says, righto, what sort of anything? He says, oh, I want to be able to dance in it, or I want to be able to paint in it, or I want to be able to listen to music in it, or... I said, so you want a party room? No, I don't want a party room. He says, I don't want to put any label on it. As soon as you put a label on it, you limit its uses. Yeah, okay. That's Jeff's way of looking at things. But anyway, we had nearly 2 years of interesting discussions and developments in building the dome. And it's with regret that burnt down, and now it's with a lot more fucking regret that he's lying there. You know, to put it simply, yeah, we've all got to go sometime, mate. He couldn't have picked a better way, I hate to say it, but it would have been fucking nice if he'd left it a bit longer. And I suppose I speak for everyone when I say it. See you later, buddy.
G'day, I'm Saz for people who don't know me. I knew Jeffrey a while. I'm like a very fun guy. I think we all had great experiences. I've tried to encapsulate some of that. I'm sure some of my experiences were the same as others of meeting Jeffrey's. I've tried to do it in a poem. I started it about 7 or 8 times. It was quite hard because I took a sedative before I remembered that I needed to write this. So let's see if it goes. A time to come together for and celebrate our Jeff. He left a mark upon us all and then got up and left. Now he walks with honey on Doctor's Point's calm shores, with footsteps left behind him, beside him honey's paws. A champion of psychedelics as medicine to use, seeing therapeutic needs for smoothing out our blues. Mushrooms for depression, anxiety treated by ketamine, MDMA for hospice care, to be readily available was his dream. Time and effort in research, beliefs and values strong. Petitioning for changes, mate, I'm sad it took too long. Working hard on festivals, bringing us together to celebrate the power of life, generous, strong and clever. I'd spent a fair few days with you through morning, noon and night, drinking whiskey, a kind of pirate punch, until we saw first light. It were long days sometimes. Then off to all the beaches to celebrate the dawn of the day, then go back and draw pictures and talk and have more say. Blue cheese crackers passed around whilst eating Marmite toast, sips of sweet drambuie, these things he loved the most. I loved it when you smiled when bumping back to reality, fractals flying round our heads, no fear of our mortality. With Quaker quietness on your side, you'd say, Sash, you're always talking, reminding me to calmly sit as swirling light was falling. My memories of you fill my heart, the things I say but can't, as you sit smiling in your chair, wearing only your underpants. Joe used to tell him to put him on eventually. With Joe you found a great happiness, a friend you really adored. And sorry, Jeff, that you have gone, but the perfect life you scored. Jeff.
Whoa, there's a lot more people here when you look from this direction than the other. Kia ora everyone, my name is Tess, and although we've all had a lot to say, I couldn't help myself, as often is the case if you know me. My father is Steve Trotter, and he was with Sue after Jeff and Sue separated. And I have so many experiences, and there's two things I'd just like to say. The first is that the time that I had in my life with Jeff in it from when I was about 10 years old really taught me that groups of adults can put their shit behind them and be there for the kids. And it's a great lesson that is doing me very well later in my life. The other thing I'd just like to say is that that complete non-judgment, it actually terrified me. I felt like he was reading my thoughts, and so sometimes I couldn't stop and speak with him. And I feel really sad about that now. But what I do know is that in there growing up with the brothers, that I feel so proud of you guys for your words today. And all of my friends and all of the people that are out in my life, Jeff has touched them too. He's helped us all grow up, and he's stood there watching us and reading our thoughts, sometimes maybe, but making us feel safe. And I'll really miss that sense of safety. Even just seeing his face here makes me feel safe to say all of these random thoughts that are in my mind. So I just want to, I guess, thank him for that, and also just say that from the people that are close to me, I know that stuff really counts, and I want to say it for them too. Kia ora.
Kia ora, I'm Saraya. So much has been said that's beautiful about Jeff, and I just wanted to say a few words to say how much he's meant to me and my community of art therapists in Ōtepoti, Dunedin. When I arrived here in 1991 from London, and I'd done training in art therapy there was no one here doing it. It was 30 years ago, and it was still a new field. But I met Jeff at outpatient groups and various other parts of Dunedin mental health. And he took me under his wing and supported me in getting going in my work. He believed in the power of creativity, art, dance, music, drama. He believed in that to transcend words, because sometimes we can't even find the words for the journeys we go on. So he's been a powerful, pivotal force of creativity and generosity in my life and in my community of art therapists. We've grown, we're getting bigger now, and there's master's programs in Christchurch and Auckland, and people are taking the creative therapies into mental health and other areas. And I feel that Jeff was a pivotal force for helping that happen in Otipoti, Dunedin. I give thanks to him for that and for the powerful creativity he's shared. He's been part of our peer group that's met for the last 10 years. We've danced and painted together. We try to live what we support others with. And he was there right to the end. When Joe rang me to tell me that he wouldn't be at our last peer group last Sunday to do the movement and dance part, I felt like my heart was ripped out of my chest, like many people. And I felt we lost him too soon. But hearing everybody's words today, I know how much he shared of himself, how generous he was, and he'll always be in our hearts. Thank you.
We've got time for a couple more. Anyone else wants to say anything? Yeah, please.
Kia ora koutou. My name's Evan Mason. I'm also a psychiatrist, a doctor, and I'm the current medical director for mental health. I've known Jeff for a long time, and actually working for Sue and the ophthalmology teams as a house surgeon before I started psychiatry training. So I learned of Jeff that way, and then meeting him at the psychiatric day hospital, day programs, later working with them, outpatient groups and the community mental health teams. We talk about medicine as being sort of a science and an art. So the learning what we do is very much a science, but learning how we do it, that's the art of it. And we talk about it being an apprenticeship. And being an apprentice to Jeff, learning how to really work with people, how to get to know them, how to find out about them without needing to use a lot of words is one of the best things that I've learned from him. On behalf of the hospital, I think he's done great work over a lot of years, and somebody mentioned coming here and starting with the job of getting the last of the long stay wards at Cherry Farm closed, and people back out into the community and with their families and living lives worth living. 40 years later, we're just about there. We're just about there. It's a long-term project. But no, he's been a great guide for all of us. And the most human, kindest doctor that I've ever known. Thank you, Jeff.
Hello everyone, I'm Chris Wisely. I'm a psychiatrist too. You're probably getting sick of hearing all the psychiatrists, but I'll lie down. Actually, I might. Actually, everything about Jeff was full of fun and barely suppressed humour. You know, there was nobody like Jeff to take you out of the pompous crap at most of the business meetings. I'd just take one look at Jeff and he had some sort of giggle going on, and that would set me off. And I became aware of this man when I was giving therapy. Oh, I wasn't giving therapy, that's a Freudian slip. I was actually doing supervision of a registrar, a guy called Stu McMaster that some of you might remember from years ago. And in this, Stu suddenly told me he'd been at a party, and he said he'd been talking to this guy, Jeff Layton, and Jeff was telling him about this wild and weird man that he'd met and all the strange conversations they'd had, and Stu just said, I knew he was talking about you. And I thought, okay, that's all right. I used to say to people that if I go mad, or when I go mad was probably more the point, I'm going to go and see Jeff. And people said, why is that? And I said, because he's the only one I've met that really gets relationship. He really understands how you think, how you tick, and he did have that very confrontational stare. But I'm just going to give you one last happy memory. I've got Lisa Turner sitting up there. She's another psychiatrist, and we all ended up at this conference together in Birmingham, and we had this wonderful meal out. And then at a certain point, Jeff was going to walk me back to my hotel, because at some point, somehow, and for some reason, we'd lost it. And Jeff pointed out there were security cameras, and he told me these were the signs of Big Brother everywhere. So there was no paranoia involved, but we just walked around for about the next hour, because he told me that, look, this is where I did my training. I know this place backwards. And we walked by all the canals. This is a city filled with canals, and we talked about really fun stuff. I don't even know what it was. But we were chattering away and giggling and looking at the stars. And after an hour, we hadn't found my hotel. And I realized that we'd walked for an hour and we ended up in exactly the same spot. I said, Jeff, mate, I thought you knew this place really well. And Jeff said, yeah, I thought I did too. And after all this fun, he suddenly looks over my shoulder and says, look, there's your hotel. And it was right behind me, which is where we'd started. And that's how it was with Jeff. You know, you had fun with him for an hour or a lifetime, as most of you people seem to have done, and at the end you get where you needed to go, but you did it by taking the time to walk together, to have fun together, to just be. He was all about the being. He was a human being, not a human doing. Well, he was a doing as well, but so yeah, like everyone else, we were really sad, but he influenced everybody here, and we all loved him, and that is it. Goodbye.
Look, I know we could go on all afternoon, and what I'm going to suggest is that we do that in a moment over drinks and chats, and everyone can talk to each other and share their memories of Jeff. But just a couple of things first. First of all, I've got a contribution from Thakur, which I'm going to read. It starts, Jeff, my dear friend, oh dear friend, your journey here has come to an end. How shall I remember you? You, in whose footsteps I walked when learning psychiatry. You, with your sense of freedom of thinking. You, who defied conventions of usual societal norms. You, with your enormous empathy and compassion. You, who had all the patience to listen to people's woes. You, who are constantly exploring the frontiers of human understanding. You who listened to your dreams and manifested them. You who had an awe of the occult and the mystic. You, my dear friend, who lived your life driven by deeper feelings. You who had a mystique about your being and self. Goodbye, dear friend. May you soar high above the clouds and journey on in the land of light, love, joy, and peace. I want to conclude with this. When I was 17 and Jeff was 15, we went hitchhiking and camping together in Ireland. And after a couple of very wet days camping outside Galway, and it turned out it was the day of the Galway races, which was not a good time to go to Galway unless you went to the races, we found ourselves dropped off by a nice American couple who were driving through Ireland a few miles south of Sligo. And the rain had stopped, and down a side road we came across a beautiful little lake where we pitched our tent for the night and lit a campfire, which we stoked with the wild thyme that was growing all around to drive away the flying ants. In fact, the flying ants, were so many of them, they completely obscured the orange of our tent. It was either this lake or one like it that features in W.B. Yeats's famous poem that I'm about to read. I wanted to conclude today's event with this, as it recalls for me a moment of the closest bonding with Jeff, recalled by both of us many times over the years. The Lake Isle of Innisfree. I will arise and go now and go to Innisfree, and a small cabin build there of clay and wattles made. 9 bean rows will I have there, a hive for the honey bee, and live alone in the bee-loud glade. And I shall have some peace there, for peace comes dropping slow, dropping from the vales of the morning to where the cricket sighs. There, midnight's all a glimmer, and noon a purple glow, and evening full of linnet's wings. I will arise and go now, for always, night and day, I hear lake water lapping with the low sounds by the shore, while I stand on the roadway or on the pavement's grey, I hear it in the deep heart's call. Jeffrey, brother, father, grandfather, uncle, lover, friend, companion, provocateur, colleague, mentor, wise counsellor. It's time for us now to send you on your final journey. Go with our gratitude and blessings. Go in peace. So maybe we can now have the Waitati militia come and collect him and take him on his way.